Now, from plants and trees to birds and bees, it's amazing what can be on our doorstep. And to let us know a little bit more, I'm joined by Angus Kennedy of Nature Northwest. Angus, good
Don, how are
afternoon.
you?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you coping in all this?
We're doing good, thanks. Yeah, I'm very grateful for the fact that it's spring.
Yes.
That we're not facing into this in October when the hour just changed the other way. The hour just changed last Saturday. It's giving us all an extra little bit in the evening time to enjoy our gardens, enjoy our own little areas where we can go for our 2 kilometre walk. And everything in nature, of course, is changing. It's my favourite season, and there's a huge amount of change happening right now.
Yeah, and the weather's been favourable as well. In fact, last week there were some lovely days, and you know it hasn't been too bad. So it means that we can get out and about. I know there's restrictions in the 2K limit and all the rest, but at least we can get out and about.
We can, yeah, and it shows, I think, in particular, Donegal's amazing ability to drain itself. And what I mean by that is February must have been one of the wettest we've ever had. It was incredibly wet. End of January was very wet too. But despite all that rain, the land is now starting to get reasonably dry. The gardens are starting to get reasonably dry. We can get out and explore. It only takes a few days, really, of decent weather. So the weather is still a little bit cold. It's a northerly breeze at the moment, as people probably noticed. So the evening times are cold. So we haven't had a huge amount of migrating birds as yet. And that cold weather can sometimes trick some of the bees and some of the other characters that are coming out. But it's supposed to change a little bit. We're going to get more southerly winds at the weekend. And that makes a big difference for our nature because it's all changing under our feet and over our heads as we speak.
Okay, great. Now, you speak about migrating birds, and what about, one of the most common, and a bird that we would all be familiar with is the little robin. Do they migrate?
They do, believe it or not. And robins, we see the robin all the time in our garden. It's there all year round, so we think it's the same robin. And robins are unusual in small birds in that they actually hold their own territory, and they sing all year round. Both the robin and the wren are two most common birds. They're the ones that sing all year round. And by singing, they're protecting a little territory or a little patch. But quite often the robins that you might see in your garden, or the ones that aren't singing, the ones that are passing by and being chased off by your resident, are robins from Scotland and the north of England. They come in large numbers in the winter time, in autumn, in the winter, and they're passing through, moving through, looking for sites. But at this time of year, if you see and hear a singing robin, it will be here all spring and right into early summer. It'll be having a nest, and they nest in the ditches around your garden, so it's well worth watching out for.
This is a good time for spotting robins.
It's a great time for spotting robins. They make nests low down. We think of nests high up in trees, typically, or we think of, say, a little blue tit, which makes a nest in its nest box, which will be halfway up your building, or halfway up a tree, or whatever. Whereas the robins actually make their nest quite often at knee level, or very low down, or waist level, knee level, even lower. And if you see a robin with a bit of food in its mouth, keep an eye on it. Now, don't go disturbing the nest, whatever you do, but keep an eye on the robin. And this time, at the moment, a very unusual situation. We've plenty of time to be sitting out in the garden, and hopefully the weather will be kind to us too. So the robin with the food in its mouth is going to either feed a mum that's sitting on eggs, or it's going to feed chicks, which will be coming out reasonably in the next few weeks. And you'll see it fly into a little hedge or into the ditch, but it won't fly directly to the nest. They're sneaky enough characters. They know the likes of us and all sorts of predators are watching. So they'll fly near and they'll fly past the entrance and they'll fly past it again a few times until eventually, if you stay still enough, they'll think the coast is clear. And you'll see suddenly they'll disappear behind a leaf, behind a bit of moss. And in there is where they found a cavity that they've filled with some lovely soft moss from your garden, and that's where they'll have their eggs and chicks.
Well, I suppose they are a reason to be cute about it, and to go past the nest and then dodge around into it, because if it's low down, it makes them more vulnerable.
Yeah, it's amazing to think really of a bird nesting so low down, but quite a few do. One of our most common migrants that will be arriving back in the next couple of weeks, we'll talk about them hopefully soon when they do start landing back, is called the willow warbler. It also nests very low down. There's quite a few birds nest low down, but they seem to be able to survive because they're masters of camouflage, and then they have this trickery of not just bolting straight in through the front door and making a big announcement. They're stealthily popping into their home. I can play the little song of the robin here for you if you'd like. It's a familiar one. It's a tricky-ish one to kind of learn, but it just comes in little snatches. I often liken it to a little jazz musician who hasn't quite made up their mind of what they're going to say. I'll play it now. Is that coming down okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Down through the airways, the lines, yeah.
Very, very clearly. And it is a very common sound. A little tricky to distinguish, but it's a common sound nonetheless.
Yeah, and the way to learn birdsong, this is a great time of year, and I've had a lot of people ask me, because we've done pieces on birdsong before, I've had people ask me, now they're interested, they have the time. If you can see the bird, and robins are very visual, so they'll stand out and they'll sing and they'll throw their head from side to side to try and project that song. So if you can see it while listening to it, it seems to go into the brain much better. Our brain is able to record that audio and learn that little bit of a song while we're watching it.
Anyhow, we're talking about robins, and there's a lot on the sea at the moment, and we're all so familiar with the robin, and a part of I think we all love the robins, and I think part of the reason is they're a relatively tame bird.
They are very tame birds, yet they're the second most common bird. The wren is even more common. We'll talk about that again at another time. But the wren tends to hide, whereas the robin loves to come right up to you. In fact, there is a lovely video. If you go on to my Facebook page, the wonderful gardening centre, Titlina in Falcara, I shared a video that they did. And Seamus up there has managed to, with great patience, has managed to get a robin feeding out of his hand. It's a gorgeous thing to see. And anybody can do this if you spend the time. Now, you'll have to spend the time and have the little bit of food and the rest. But a lovely thing to do with children in your own garden or in your own area is see if you can identify that song. And then go out, and you could do this as part of your schoolwork, part of your nature work. This is the kind of thing we'll do with schools. We would be doing over the next few weeks in normal times. We would map the garden, or maybe if it was the school garden in that case, but you could easily do a very rough map of the shape of your own garden, maybe draw in some big features like big trees and things like that, and then walk around the garden, and every time you hear the robin, mark it down, because that will be the little robin's territory, and you can see how many robins are nesting in your own garden. And there's a good chance, if you've a decent-sized garden at all, that you might have 2 or even 3 nesting in that area. But they take up a small little territory, and they'll be there all year long. They'll have little families, and in a few weeks' time, you'll see lots of baby robins coming out too.
All right, yeah, it's great that they keep their territory, so you'll be seeing the same robin or maybe the little robins then. Now we've got some questions. You know what? Let's move on to from the robin on to a couple of plants that are very common. First of all, before we go to listeners' questions, and the celandine, not a very popular name, but it's if you saw the image, a very, very distinctive flower.
Very distinctive. People often think they're buttercups. They're in the same family, but they're quite different, really. And the celandine, or its proper name is the lesser celandine, is a classic spring flower. Now, an awful lot of our flowers are woodland flowers originally. They would have adapted to grow under trees. So hence, anything that comes out in spring is typically a woodland plant, or a plant that can survive in shade. So it puts out its flowers to try and get the early pollinators, the early bees, before the canopy closes. In other words, before all the forest, all the leaves come out in the trees and the forest gets darker in the summertime. So that's why plants like celandine come out now. It's a really easy one to identify. You'll see it in the ditches. It likes damp. It likes slightly shady places. You'll see it under any bushes or under any trees in your own garden, or you'll see it if you walk around any of our wonderful hedgerows in Donegal. I think people are really starting to enjoy their hedgerows at the moment. Celandine has 8 petals. So again, it's a nice one with your children. It's a bright, bright yellow flower, 8 petals, sometimes more, but 8 normally. So sometimes the bright yellow flower can go kind of whitish once it's gone past its best by date. And it has little heart-shaped leaves. The heart-shaped leaves will be about twice the size of your thumbnails, I suppose, maybe a bit bigger than a €2 coin. A heart-shaped leaf and 8 petals.
And widely seen at the moment, it will be this month and next.
Yeah, we'll
April and May.
We'll continue to flower right up until late spring. So the idea is that we'll hopefully be able to point out a couple of things, a couple of animals like the robin and a couple of little flowers that people will be able to look for in their gardens each week as we roll through this. But the celandine is a lovely, easy one to learn, and it just keeps on giving and giving and giving. It'll flower for a long time. It used to be 21st of February used to be traditionally called Celandine Day because it was one of the big first signs of spring. And before we had all of our modern technologies, these kind of things were hugely important to let people know that the seasons were changing, growing season was beginning, and so on.
Broadcasting throughout the Northwest and across the world online, this is Highland Radio.
If you've got any questions for Angus, then give us a call on 07491 25000 or text us to 086 60 25000. A number of questions already coming in for Angus. And we were chatting about the celandine and the little robin. And let's turn now to another plant. And in this case, Angus, it's one that has, I think, a bad reputation. The dandelion. Why has it got such a bad reputation?
I think the dandelion has such a bad reputation because it tends to go everywhere. It's extremely successful. I think they're very beautiful if you look closely at them. And if you have a little magnifying glass and get outside and get out with your children and look right into the heart of a dandelion, right into the centre of it. It's amazing shades of yellow, very, very deep, very rich yellow, very beautiful colour. But sometimes people are put off with them because they're tough. They can tend to grow on the gravel, they can tend to grow on your lawn, they can tend to grow all over the place. But they're hugely important. They're hugely important for the bees and the hoverflies that are just emerging at this time of year and need some vital food.
Right. And yeah, I suppose some of us would look on them as like a step up from a weed in that there's so many places and they can, they grow in cracks and, around verges and stuff where they shouldn't be.
Yeah, they're unusual. For a lot of wildflowers, they like nutrient-poor land. In other words, little areas that aren't great for growing other things. So you'll often see them growing in gravel and things like that. But dandelion is also able to adapt, and it's able to keep up with grass. And grass often tends to outcompete most things once it's established. So especially if your grass is cut very tight, the dandelions will take off then, and they'll do pretty well. If you open them up, they're a beautiful flower to have a look and completely open it up, as in tear it open from the side, and you'll see the little pollen. You'll see the pollen at the very top. You'll see the nectar, which the bees and the butterflies are after for their own fuel. You'll see it glistening underneath the flower, and just underneath that again, then you'll see all the little seeds that are just being fertilized and will turn into those little seeds with the little wispy bits that help them to blow around. So they're a lovely way of explaining or figuring out how a flower works and what it's all about, and by looking inside them.
And very
important.
Then
even their name themselves, I think, is fantastic. Dandelion comes from the French dent de lion, the teeth of the lion. And if you look at their leaves are kind of longish and quite jaggedy. And if you can imagine two of their leaves shutting together like the jaws of a lion.
Right. Okay, that is the dandelion. Now, someone says that they have a hedgehog in their garden and have had the hedgehog for a few years. What sort of den could I make him to shelter in?
Well, have a look. Have a look online. Google hedgehog houses, hedgehog homes, and you'll see you can buy all sorts of different things. But I'm sure you'd easily be able to make up. They're a bit like making a birdhouse, but it's like making a tiny miniature kennel. So some people make those kind of things. Another really nice thing to do, not just for hedgehogs but for all sorts of wildlife, is if you're tidying up in your garden at all, get some piles of sticks and logs and put them down in a little kind of wild corner somewhere. And you'll get all sorts of things in there. Frogs will often shelter there over the winter time. Hedgehogs will shelter in places like that, under little twigs, under piles of leaves, and under logs. It's one of the reasons that we always ask people to check bonfires, for instance, around Halloween time, because it's often the kind of place that a hedgehog will go to. And if it's particularly cold nights, you can put out a little bit of cat food for them, and you'll get them coming right up and eating that at night time. But they'll gobble up the slugs and the snails for you, the same ones that might be trying to eat your vegetables or eat your flowers. So they're a really useful thing to have in the garden.
And are hedgehogs relatively tame?
They stay away from us like most creatures out there. But if you're feeding them, you will get to see them, and you'll get to see them fairly close. Right. I've often seen footage or photos of people who have left out food for them near their back windows, and then if they keep an eye on that at night time, then they'll get to see them if they're lucky. But just watch out, cats and dogs will chase them away.
Someone else says our hedgehogs are back. They are adorable to watch, fascinating to have in your garden.
That's brilliant to see, yeah, and they are fascinating little things. And soon, in the next few weeks, of course, they'll be breeding as well. And a little later on in the year, then they'll have their own pups that you need to watch out for, and they will tend to disperse around the place. They're amazing creatures with their little spines. The little spines are actually hairs, especially adapted hairs, and they're incredibly tough. If you've ever, or next time when all of this is over, get into Glenveigh National Park and go into their bridge house there or into their visitor centre, and they have some stuffed hedgehogs, and you can get to feel what the spines are like, and they're very tough, and of course that makes great protection. They curl up in a little ball, and most things, so foxes, which will eat anything they can find, foxes can't get into hedgehogs. About the only thing that can kill a hedgehog in the wild in Ireland is badgers. Badgers have a way of kind of prizing them open and getting at them. But everything else, apart from our own dogs, aren't able to get near them.
Okay. A caller says they've received bee bombs. What should they do about them? What's bee bombs?
Bee bombs, and this is something that has really taken off now in the last couple of years since the pollinator plans have started to come in, and people have started to get conscious of the fact that the bees need our help. And one of the problems that bees have is there's just not enough food, because we're busy chopping down or spraying those dandelions. We're busy chopping down things like willow and whatnot. And bees, when they emerge at this time of year, and not just bees, the butterflies, the hoverflies, the moths, so many of the different pollinators, they need food all year round. So bee bombs are little mixtures of wildflower seeds, usually mixed up into a little ball of clay. And the idea is that you go out into your local rough patches, preferably somewhere that doesn't have too much nutrition, that doesn't have too much grass competing with it, and you throw down some of these little seed bombs, and then some of those seeds will germinate and take. If you're buying or purchasing seed bombs, just try and be aware of getting native seeds. And if you look at pollinators.ie, they will give you some great ideas of the kind of things to plant and the kind of things you can have. But I've heard of a lot of people doing that, and this Christmas a lot of people got presents of bee bombs, which is a wonderful thing to do. Great fun to go out with your children, throw a few of these things around, and see will they take off. And some of them will inevitably take off, and you'll be helping wildlife.
All right, someone says here, what can you do about keeping crows away from your house? And I've got a question for you that's tied in with this as well. And it's not crows, it's a slightly smaller bird, and they've started to... there's a nest, and they're going into the nest just under the eaves of the house, and they're making a noise, and it's a tapping noise, and it's early in the morning, and it is really annoying. So if you could answer the two questions, Angus, keeping crows away from the house, and in the case of our nesting bird, what could I do? I don't want to go in, because there's a little hole, and they've got up into in through the gap, and they're obviously nesting in there because I've seen them coming and going.
I have the same in my own house. They've managed to poke out the corners just at the very top of the roof. And there's starlings in there, which are the ones that are kind of dark in colour but speckled really. And if you get to look at them closely, they're quite multicoloured, quite beautiful, quite kind of iridescent colours on them. And then there's the little sparrows, which will have the grey, the house sparrow, which will have the grey top, and both of those will nest in houses. I leave them alone, I gotta say, in my own house. They're protected once the nesting season is here. Right. You can't interfere with a nest that's there. Sometimes what people do is they might put up something like, say, ribbons or a CD dangling from the area to try and frighten them off a bit. But if they're getting in at this stage and they're starting to establish themselves at this stage, if you can at all, do leave them alone. They are protected by the law. And the reason for that is because their numbers have plummeted. One of the reasons that they're coming to our house is because there isn't enough suitable habitat for them. There isn't enough old, big hollow trees, which is what they like.
Now, how long are they likely to be there?
They will be there about probably 6 to 8 weeks. And you'll see the duration of this stay-at-home stay-at-home program. You'll be staying at home with as far as starlings. What you can do is you can put up nest boxes, and a little bit later on, I will get some links to nest boxes for both sparrows and for starlings, and I will put them up on. I'll put them up on my website. Okay. And you can build those, and quite often people have put up nest boxes and they've been very successful, and they'll get them in. And if you are able to keep them there at all, they really need our help, because their numbers, they've disappeared. And sometimes in Donegal we find that hard to understand, because we're lucky, we're still surrounded by lots of biodiversity, lots of different nature, but in other parts of the country they're in ferocious trouble. The crows,
and we're out of time, so just in a matter of seconds, if you can shed any light on the crow situation.
I don't have any tips to get rid of them. Farmers use various bangers and that kind of thing to try and scare them away, and scarecrows, they're not very successful, very adaptable birds. If they are robbing all your bird food, remember that the smaller birds will pick up the scraps that are underneath. They gobble up the porridge that I leave out for the small birds on my bird table, but the small birds still manage to pick up lots of little scraps.
All right. Okay, we had lots of other things to talk to, and we'll hopefully get to them next week. We'll during this lockdown, we'll chat regularly, so we'll make this a weekly conversation, if that's okay. And is that okay?
Yeah, that's great stuff. Just watch out for organic gardens. That's OUorganicgardens.ie. There's Joanne Butler. She's doing a little blog every Sunday and Wednesday on Facebook at 1 p.m. I put a link up to it on my own naturenorthwest.ie page, along with information about everything that we're going to be talking about, actually, and different things you can do in the garden. But she is doing some great gardening slots, and now we have the time in our hands and the weather's getting better.
Indeed. Angus, chat to you next week.
John, thank you very much.